The kid has great heart.
I'm interested in heart.
He wore a derby hat in a land of Stetsons, carried a cane where others carried guns, and the actor cast to play him, he almost walked away on day one. Bat Masterson wasn't your typical TV Western. It broke the mold with style, wit, and a gambler who would rather talk than shoot. But behind the gentleman gunfighter image, nothing was polished. The star hated horses. The studio wanted someone else. In one episode, it nearly started a lawsuit that could have killed the series. These are 20 weird facts about Bat Masterson. And wait for the bonus, because there's a prop that disappeared from set and turned up in the strangest place decades later. Tip your hat, this ride gets complicated fast. Number 1. Gene Barry wasn't supposed to be Bat Masterson. The role was offered to someone else first, a bigger name with Western credentials and box office appeal. But that actor read the pilot script and said no. He didn't like the character. Too slick, too smart, not enough action. The studio panicked because production was already scheduled, sets were built, and NBC had committed to a full-season sight unseen. They needed someone fast. Gene Barry's name came up almost by accident during a casting meeting. He'd been doing stage work, had done some film, but westerns weren't his territory. Still, someone said he had the right look, sophisticated, elegant, different. They called him in for a reading, handed him the script, and Barry did something unexpected. He didn't play Bat as a gunslinger. He played him like a chess player, calm, calculated, always 3 moves ahead. The room went silent. Then the producer smiled and said one word: perfect. Barry signed the next day, but he had no idea what he was walking into. The real Bat Masterson had been a lawman, a gambler, a sports writer. This was going to be something else entirely, and Gene Barry, he'd have to figure it out on camera. Number 2. The cane wasn't just a prop. It was a weapon, a statement, and a problem all at once. In the pilot episode, Bat Masterson walks into town carrying a walking stick with a gold handle. It looked refined, almost out of place in the dusty frontier setting. But the original script called for a standard revolver as his main weapon, just like every other TV cowboy. Gene Barry pushed back. He told the producers that if Bat was supposed to be different, make him actually different. Give him something nobody else carries. The cane stayed, and it became iconic. But it also became a nightmare for the prop department. The first cane they built broke during a fight scene. The second one was too heavy. The third bent during a stunt. By the time they found one that worked, they'd gone through 7 versions. And even then, Barry had to be careful. One wrong swing, and the whole thing would shatter. The prop master eventually commissioned 3 identical canes that rotated throughout filming. One for close-ups, one for action, one for backup. Fans loved it. Critics called it gimmicky, but Barry knew the truth. In a world where everyone looked the same, the cane made Bat Masterson unforgettable, and sometimes being different was the only way to survive. Number 3.
We'll see about that.
Gene Barry hated horses. Not disliked, hated. And this was a problem because Bat Masterson was supposed to be a frontier lawman who rode into danger every week. But Barry couldn't stand being in the saddle. He'd done a few riding scenes in previous projects and nearly got thrown twice. So, when production started, he made a deal with the producers. Limit the horseback scenes as much as possible, or he'd walk. The writers scrambled. They rewrote episodes to have Bat arrive by stagecoach, train, or on foot. When a horse was absolutely necessary, they used doubles, quick cuts, and camera tricks to hide the fact that Barry was barely in frame. In one episode, Bat rides into town for what should be a 2-minute sequence. But if you watch closely, you'll see the shot only lasts about 15 seconds, and the actor's face is mostly obscured by shadow and a hat brim. That wasn't artistic choice. That was a stunt rider doing the work while Barry waited off camera. The crew joked about it constantly, but Barry didn't care. He knew his strengths, and sitting on a 1,000-pound animal wasn't one of them. So, Bat Masterson became the rare TV cowboy who walked more than he rode, and somehow it made the character even more distinctive. A gambler who strolled into danger like he owned the street. Number 4.
Silverton, Colorado, May 20, 1886.
The show was supposed to be grittier, darker, more violent. The original pitch for Bat Masterson leaned hard into the lawlessness of the Old West. Shootouts, saloon brawls, morally gray characters making brutal choices. But NBC had a problem. They were trying to clean up TV westerns after years of complaints from parent groups and sponsors. So, when they saw the pilot, they demanded changes. Tone down the blood, cut the cynicism. Make Bat more heroic, more likable. The producers resisted at first, but the network held firm. If you want prime time, you follow the rules. So they pulled back, rewrote dialogue, softened edges. What was supposed to be a noir western became something lighter, more charming, almost playful in tone. And Gene Barry, he noticed immediately. He later said the character he'd signed on to play disappeared somewhere between the pilot and episode 2. The Bat Masterson that made it to air was smoother, wittier, less dangerous. Some fans loved it, others felt cheated, but the shift worked commercially. The show became a hit, not because it was dark, but because it was different. Bat didn't need to be the toughest gun in the West. He just needed to be the smartest man in the room, and that, somehow, was enough. Number 5. There was no theme song at first. The early episodes of Bat Masterson opened with generic orchestral music, the kind you'd hear on a dozen other westerns. It was fine, it was forgettable, and the network hated it. They wanted something catchy, something that screamed Bat Masterson the second you heard it. So they brought in a team of composers and told them to write something bold. What they got back was a jaunty, up-tempo number with lyrics that name-dropped the character and his cane. Back when the West was very young, there lived a man named Masterson. It was corny, it was obvious, and it worked. The song became so associated with the show that decades later, people who'd never seen an episode could still hum the tune. But here's the weird part. Gene Barry reportedly hated it. He thought it made the show feel too campy, too light. He wanted something more dramatic, more mysterious. He pushed for a rewrite, but the network refused. The song stayed. And over time, even Barry had to admit it stuck. Because in television, sometimes the thing you fight against becomes the thing people remember most. The theme song wasn't subtle, but Bat Masterson never was. It wore a derby hat and carried a cane in the land of six-shooters. Subtlety was never the point. Number 6. The real Bat Masterson's family wasn't happy. When the show premiered in 1958, some of Masterson's surviving relatives spoke out publicly. They said the portrayal was inaccurate, too glamorized, too Hollywood. The real Bat had been a tough frontier lawman, a buffalo hunter, a gambler, yes, but also a man who'd killed in the line of duty and lived a hard, violent life. The TV version, with its tailored suits and clever dialogue, felt like revisionist history to them. One relative reportedly sent a letter to NBC calling the show a disgrace to the family name. The network didn't respond. The producers kept filming. And Gene Barry, when asked about the criticism, shrugged and said he wasn't playing a documentary. He was playing a character inspired by a legend. There's a difference. And he was right, because TV westerns were never about accuracy. They were about myth-making, about turning rough men into heroes, outlaws into icons, history into entertainment. Bat Masterson, the show, didn't care if it got the facts right. It cared if it got the feeling right. And for millions of viewers who tuned in every week, it did. They didn't want the real Bat Masterson. They wanted Gene Barry in a derby hat, smiling like he knew something you didn't. And that's exactly what they got. Number 7, one episode nearly got the show canceled before it even found its footing. In the first season, the writers crafted a storyline involving a crooked politician and a rigged election. It was supposed to be a simple morality tale. Bat exposes corruption and justice prevails. But the script included dialogue that closely mirrored a real political scandal happening at the time in a southwestern state. Too closely. When the episode aired, a sitting governor reportedly threatened legal action, claiming the show was slandering his administration. NBC's legal department panicked. They pulled the episode from reruns immediately and demanded the producers never reference real political figures or events again, even indirectly. The whole mess could have killed the series if sponsors had pulled out, but they didn't. Ratings stayed strong, and the controversy, ironically, gave Bat Masterson more publicity than any ad campaign could have. Suddenly, people were talking about the show, debating it, tuning in to see what all the fuss was about. The episode itself was never aired again during the original run and remained buried in the vault for years. But it taught the writers a valuable lesson. Fiction and reality could blend, but only to a point. Cross that line, and you risked more than bad reviews. You risked lawsuits, cancellations, and careers. Bat Masterson survived. Barely. Number 8. The costumes cost more than some of the sets. Gene Barry's wardrobe for Bat Masterson was custom-tailored, expensive, and completely impractical for a TV Western. Most shows dressed their cowboys in durable, reusable outfits that could take a beating. Bat wore three-piece suits, embroidered vests, and polished boots that looked like they belonged in a Victorian drawing room, not a dusty frontier town. The wardrobe department went through hell trying to keep everything looking pristine. One fight scene would scuff a jacket beyond repair. A single day of exterior shooting in the desert heat would ruin a shirt. They had to order duplicates of every outfit, sometimes 3 or 4 versions of the same costume just to make it through a week of filming. And the cleaning bills, they ate into the budget like crazy. But the producers wouldn't budge. They knew the look was what set Bat apart. While other TV cowboys wore leather and denim, Bat Masterson wore silk and wool. He looked like he'd stepped out of a New York gentleman's club and landed in Dodge City by mistake. And that contrast, that visual dissonance, it became the show's signature. Critics loved it, costume designers studied it, and Gene Barry, he wore those suits like armor. Because in a world where everyone else looked rough and ready, Bat Masterson looked like he'd already won. Number 9. There was an episode that was filmed but never aired, and nobody knows why. Midway through the second season, the cast and crew completed production on a standalone story involving Bat investigating a murder in a small mining town. Standard stuff, nothing controversial, nothing experimental. But when it came time to schedule the episode, it disappeared. No announcement, no explanation, it just vanished from the lineup. Rumors started immediately. Some crew members said the footage was damaged in processing. Others claimed NBC didn't like the pacing and shelved it. A few whispered that Gene Barry himself demanded it be pulled because he hated his performance. But nobody could confirm anything. The script still exists in archives, and a few production stills surfaced over the years, showing scenes that never made it to air. But the finished episode, if it was ever truly finished, has never been seen publicly. Over the decades, TV historians have tried to track it down. They've searched studio vaults, contacted surviving crew members, dug through NBC's records. Nothing. It's become one of those strange, unresolved mysteries in television history. A lost episode of a popular show that simply ceased to exist. And maybe that's fitting, because Bat Masterson was always about illusion, about things not being quite what they seemed. Even the show itself had secrets. Number 10. The ratings were huge, but the critics were vicious. When Bat Masterson premiered, audiences loved it immediately. The show pulled strong numbers, landed in the top 20, and became one of NBC's most reliable hits. But the critical response was brutal. Reviewers called it shallow, overly stylized, a mockery of real Western history. One prominent critic wrote that Gene Barry's performance was more concerned with looking good than being believable. Another said the show had all the depth of a dime novel and half the grit. The attacks kept coming, week after week, tearing apart the writing, the directing, the whole concept. And Gene Barry read every single review. He later admitted it stung. He'd worked hard to make Bat Masterson something different, something sophisticated. And instead of praise, he got lectures about authenticity from critics who'd never set foot west of the Hudson River. But here's the thing. The audience didn't care. They kept watching. They bought the merchandise. They quoted the dialogue, and slowly, the critical tide began to turn. By the second season, some of those same critics started acknowledging that maybe, just maybe, Bat Masterson knew exactly what it was doing. That the style wasn't a flaw, it was the point. Because sometimes, the best way to stand out is to refuse to fit in. And Bat Masterson, with its derby hats and walking canes, never tried to be like anything else. Number 11. The poker scenes were real, and the money was too. In most TV westerns, card games were faked. Actors shuffled blank cards, pretended to bet, and followed choreography like a dance. But Gene Barry insisted on authenticity. He'd learned poker as a teenager and loved the game. So, during filming, whenever Bat sat down at a card table, Barry demanded real cards, real chips, and real gambling knowledge from everyone in the scene. The producers agreed, thinking it would add realism. What they didn't expect was that Barry would start teaching the other actors actual poker strategy between takes. Pretty soon, the entire cast was playing for real money during breaks. Small stakes at first, a few dollars here and there, but it escalated. By the end of season 1, there were regular high-stakes games happening in the dressing rooms after hours. One cameraman reportedly lost a week's salary in a single night. The assistant director had to be loaned money by the prop master to cover his losses. It got so out of hand that the studio had to step in and ban gambling on set entirely. But Barry didn't stop. He just moved the games off lot, hosting poker nights at his house where cast and crew would show up with cash and cigars. Years later, one actor admitted he learned more about cards from Gene Barry than from any casino. And if you watch closely during Bat's poker scenes, you can see it. The way he handles the cards, reads his opponents, controls the table. That wasn't acting, that was muscle memory. Because Gene Barry didn't just play Bat Masterson, he lived him. Number 12. One guest star refused to memorize his lines and nearly derailed an entire episode. Midway through season 2, a veteran character actor was cast as a corrupt sheriff. He had a long career, plenty of credits, and a reputation for being difficult. When he showed up to set, he had the script in hand, but hadn't learned a single line. The director asked him when he'd be ready to shoot. The actor said he'd read off cue cards. The director explained they didn't use cue cards on Bat Masterson. The actor shrugged and said then he'd improvise. Gene Barry was furious. He'd spent days preparing for their scenes together, timing his delivery, finding the rhythm, and now this guy was gonna wing it? The first take was a disaster. The actor stumbled through dialogue, missed cues, and threw off everyone else's timing. They tried again. Same result. By the third take, Barry walked off set and told the producers to either replace the actor or rewrite him out of the episode. The producers panicked. They couldn't afford to lose a day of shooting, so they made a compromise. They'd shoot the actor's scenes in extreme close-ups with his lines fed to him off camera, then cut around him in wider shots using a double. It worked, barely. The episode aired, and most viewers never noticed the patchwork editing. But on set, everyone knew. And Gene Barry made sure that actor was never invited back. Number 13. The show's biggest stunt sent someone to the hospital, and it wasn't supposed to be dangerous. In a climactic fight scene, Bat had to leap from a second-story balcony onto a canvas awning below. Standard stunt work, done 1,000 times on 1,000 different shows. But on the day of shooting, something went wrong with the rigging. The awning was secured at the wrong angle, and when the stuntman made the jump, he hit the edge instead of the center. The frame collapsed. He fell straight through and slammed into the ground 12 feet below. The entire crew froze. Someone yelled for a medic. The stuntman wasn't moving. For a terrifying minute, everyone thought they'd just witnessed something catastrophic. Then he groaned, rolled over, and tried to stand up. Broken ribs, a concussion, and a fractured wrist. He was rushed to the hospital and didn't return to set for 6 weeks. The producers investigated, found that the rigging supervisor had misread the specs, and fired him on the spot, but the damage was done. Gene Barry reportedly went pale watching the accident happen and refused to do any physical stunts himself after that. He'd already been cautious, but now he insisted on doubles for everything, even simple action beats. The scene was reshot a week later, with a different stuntman and triple-checked safety measures. It made the final cut, but if you know the story, you can feel the tension in that moment, because what looks effortless on screen almost ended in tragedy. Number 14. Gene Barry almost quit after the first season, and it had nothing to do with the show. He was exhausted, burned out from the relentless shooting schedule. Television production in the late 1950s was brutal. Long days, 6-day weeks, minimal breaks between episodes. Barry had signed on thinking it would be a manageable gig, maybe a year or two of steady work. But the success of Bat Masterson meant the network wanted more episodes, faster turnarounds, bigger ratings. By the time season 1 wrapped, Barry was drained. He told the producers he needed time off, maybe a few months to rest and recharge. They said no. Production on season 2 was already scheduled, and they couldn't afford to delay. Barry dug in. He threatened to walk. The producers countered with more money, better hours, creative input on scripts. Barry considered it, but still wasn't sure. What changed his mind wasn't the money or the perks. It was a letter from a kid in Kansas who'd watched every episode and said Bat Masterson was his hero. The kid wrote about how the show made him feel brave, how he'd started wearing a hat like bats, how he wanted to be smart and clever instead of just tough. Barry read that letter 3 times. Then he signed the contract for season 2. Not because he wanted to, but because he realized the show meant something to people. And sometimes that's reason enough to keep going. Number 15. The derby hat became a merchandising nightmare. When Bat Masterson took off, NBC wanted to capitalize immediately. Toy guns, lunchboxes, trading cards, the usual stuff. But the one item kids wanted most was Bat's signature derby hat. Simple enough, right? Wrong. The hat in the show was a custom piece, made by a high-end hatter in Los Angeles. It wasn't a mass-market item. So, when the network approached manufacturers about producing replicas, they ran into problems. The shape was wrong, the material was cheap, the brim wouldn't hold its form. Every prototype looked like a sad imitation, nothing like what Gene Barry wore on screen. The first batch that made it to stores was so poorly made that kids and parents sent them back in droves. One reviewer called them flimsy felt disasters. The network pulled them from shelves and went back to the drawing board. It took 3 different manufacturers and 9 months before they finally produced a derby that looked halfway decent. By then, the merchandising window had closed. Sales were disappointing, and the hats ended up in clearance bins across the country. Decades later, those failed prototypes became collector's items, worth more than the official versions ever sold for. Because sometimes, the mistakes are more valuable than the successes. And in the case of Bat Masterson's derby, the ones that didn't work became the ones people actually wanted. Number 16, there was a love interest written for Bat that never made it past the writer's room. In early development, the producers wanted to give the character a recurring romantic subplot, a saloon singer, a school teacher, someone who could appear in multiple episodes and give Bat emotional stakes beyond his weekly adventures. The writers crafted a character named Claire, a widow running a boarding house in Dodge City. She was smart, independent, and a perfect match for Bat's wit and charm. Scripts were written, an actress was even cast, but Gene Barry shut it down. He told the producers that Bat Masterson worked because he was untethered, a lone wolf who could drift from town to town without baggage. Adding a girlfriend would anchor him, make him predictable, turn the show into something softer. The producers argued that romance would broaden the audience, bring in more female viewers. Barry didn't budge. He said if they forced the character into the show, he'd play it with zero chemistry and make it unwatchable. The producers backed down. Claire was written out before she ever appeared on screen, and Bat Masterson remained romantically unattached for its entire run. Looking back, Barry was probably right. The show's appeal was built on freedom, on a character who answered to no one. A girlfriend would have changed that dynamic completely, and sometimes knowing what not to add is just as important as knowing what to include. Number 17. The show was almost filmed in color, and the decision to stay black and white nearly killed it. By 1959, color television was becoming the standard. Bonanza premiered that year in full color and dominated the ratings. NBC pressured Bat Masterson to make the switch, arguing that black and white was becoming obsolete. The producers resisted, insisting the noir-style cinematography was part of the show's identity. The network threatened to move them to a worse time slot if they didn't modernize. For weeks it was a standoff. Finally, a compromise was reached. They'd shoot one test episode in color and see how it looked. The results were mixed. The costumes popped beautifully, but something was lost. The shadows, the mood, the sense of danger, all of it felt diluted in bright Technicolor. Gene Barry watched the test footage and said it looked like a musical, not a Western. The producers agreed, and they decided to stay with black and white. It was a gamble, and it didn't pay off. Ratings started to slip as audiences gravitated toward newer, flashier shows. By the end of season 3, Bat Masterson was struggling to compete. The show ended after 108 episodes, not because it stopped being good, but because it refused to change. Some called it stubborn, others called it principled. Either way, Bat Masterson stayed true to its vision until the very end. And maybe that's the only way it could have gone out, on its own terms. Number 18. One of the most famous episodes was written in a single night. Late in season 2, a scheduled script fell through when the writer missed his deadline. Production was set to begin in less than 24 hours, and they had nothing to shoot. The producers panicked. They called an emergency meeting with the writing staff, begging someone to come up with anything usable. One junior writer, a guy who had mostly done rewrites and punch-ups, said he had an idea. He'd been toying with a story about a con artist pretending to be Bat Masterson, using the real Bat's reputation to swindle townsfolk. The producers loved it. They told him to go write it immediately. He went home, drank an entire pot of coffee, and typed straight through the night. By 6 a.m., he had a complete script. Rough, yes. Unpolished, absolutely, but it worked. He delivered it to the set that morning, and they started shooting that afternoon. Gene Barry barely had time to read through his lines before cameras rolled, but somehow, the energy of it all came through on screen. The episode was fast-paced, funny, and one of the most memorable of the entire series. It later won a Writers Guild nomination, and that junior writer's career took off, all because of one impossible deadline and a very long night. Sometimes, the best work happens when there's no time to overthink it. Number 19. The final episode wasn't supposed to be the final episode. When season 3 wrapped, everyone assumed they'd be back for a 4th. Ratings were still decent, the cast was intact, and NBC hadn't indicated otherwise. But during the summer hiatus, the network made a decision. They wanted to clear space for new programming, shows that could compete with the explosion of color westerns flooding the airwaves. Bat Masterson was quietly canceled, with no fanfare, no announcement, just a letter to the producers thanking them for their work. Gene Barry found out from his agent. He was stunned. He'd thought they had at least one more season, maybe two. The last episode they had filmed was a standard adventure. Nothing special, no closure, no grand finale, just Bat riding off into another town for another case that would never be resolved. When it aired, viewers had no idea they'd just watched the series end. There was no goodbye, no final bow. Bat Masterson simply stopped. Years later, Barry said that felt oddly appropriate. The real Bat Masterson didn't get a neat ending either. He just kept living, kept moving, until one day he didn't. And maybe that's how legends should end. Not with a conclusion, but with the sense that somewhere out there, the story is still happening. We just stopped watching. Number 20, the cast reunion that almost happened became one of TV's great missed opportunities. In the mid-1980s, a producer approached Gene Barry about bringing Bat Masterson back for a TV movie. The idea was simple, an older Bat reflecting on his past adventures, solving one last case in a changing West. Barry was intrigued. He started reaching out to surviving cast members, gauging interest. Most were on board. Scripts were commissioned. A network expressed interest. But then complications. Rights issues, scheduling conflicts, budget concerns. The project stalled, then collapsed entirely. Barry was disappointed but philosophical about it. He said maybe some things are better left in the past, preserved exactly as they were. And he was probably right. Because Bat Masterson worked in a specific time, with a specific style, and trying to recapture that decades later would have been nearly impossible. Better to let it live in memory, in reruns, in the minds of people who remember a gentleman gunfighter in a derby hat who refused to play by anyone else's rules. The reunion never happened. Bat Masterson stayed frozen in time, exactly where it belonged. Bonus fact: the cane disappeared from the set during the final week of production and turned up in the strangest place 30 years later. After the show wrapped, the prop department cataloged everything, boxing up costumes, set pieces, and Bat's iconic walking stick. Or at least they thought they did. One of the three canes, the main one used in close-ups, vanished. No one knew when, no one knew how. It just wasn't there. For years, fans and collectors wondered what happened to it. Then in 1991, a woman in Oregon contacted a TV memorabilia auction house. She'd found the cane in her late father's garage, wrapped in newspaper from 1961. Her father had worked as a grip on the show, and apparently he had taken it home as a souvenir, never telling anyone. She didn't know what it was worth, just that it had been sitting in a box for 3 decades collecting dust. The auction house authenticated it, and it sold for over $15,000 to a private collector. Gene Barry heard about it and laughed. He said it was perfect that the cane, like Bat himself, had been out there all along, just waiting to be found again.